This is Shack Talk, presented by Eskimo Ice Fishing Gear and hosted by Kyle Agre and Anthony Kleinwachter. Turn up your speakers, grab your gear, and hit the ice with us as we talk ice fishing.
Come on in and grab a bucket. We are talking ice fishing. Kyle Agre, Anthony Kleinwachter. We are your hosts, and this is Shack Talk Ice Fishing Podcast. We're back for another week, another episode here on Shack Talk. Before we jump too far into it, Anthony, I got to ask you, as this podcast drops, you're at wheels turning. You are headed to the opposite direction of what we're going to be talking about a lot tonight. But tell us what you got ahead of us.
Yeah, heading west. We're gonna go out and tackle the expansive reservoir of Fort Peck. So going after some big lake trout. Last year we went out there, had a blast, but this time around we're going to try and maybe do a little targeting for some walleye and pike as well. So excited to try that out. Obviously, lake trout is going to be primary species just because it's one of those destinations where they're abundant and you can, get into some pretty good numbers. And it's one of those stateside lake trout destinations that, it's one of those fisheries where you can get on fairly consistently. There are a lot of tricky things with it being a reservoir and how it freezes, when it freezes, but things are looking pretty good so far this year.
Excellent. Have you hit the ice here close to home?
I have been out a little bit, kind of just bouncing around the lakes area, Detroit lakes, intermittently, and had some luck. Conditions, I know a lot of people were worried with all the snow we had, but the cold we had firmed things up pretty well. Some lakes people are getting around with trucks. A lot of the other lakes, it's obviously safe to get around with ATVs and snowmobiles, and which I've primarily been doing, but I was actually surprised that the conditions were as good as they were. How about you?
Yeah, some of the just day trips here close to home within an hour or so's drive, that Detroit Lakes area, just hit the ice a couple of times. And then last week had a chance to make the trek over to Mille Lacs and ran around out there for a day. That fishery is amazing. Absolutely amazing. I wouldn't say we were pulling fish in hand over fist, but it seemed like everything we caught was in that 21 to 24, 25 inch range for walleyes. And who's going to complain about a day of pulling those kind of fish through the hole? It was pretty fun. So yeah, good. And, you get in my world, I've got the ice show season behind me. The holidays are behind me. And, up to today or this point, any ice fishing I've had the opportunity to do has been bonus for me. My real bulk of the ice season is ahead of me, and I'm very excited to get rolling on that. So it should be fun. Hey, we don't want to make Mr. Tollefson wait around all night listening to us chatter. Let's bring him in. We've got our guest for the episode, Blake Tollefson. He's an outdoor writer. He is a outdoor personality, and he works within the industry, representing and partnering with quite a number of different major brands within, the ice fishing world. And we're going to talk Wisconsin ice fishing. Blake, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me, guys.
How's the weather over in Wisconsin? How's the ice conditions? Let's kick it off with that.
So it kind of depends on where you're at. My neck of the woods is not terrible. Things started out very, very terribly. So I'm just north of the Eau Claire area. We got late ice. We got a lot of snow on top of that little ice we had. So we had a lot of unsafe lakes. We had a lot of slush. Things are finally shaping up to the point where people are able to take some ATVs out depending on the lake. Snowmobile, you can go pretty much everywhere. Still no truck traffic around here. But northern Wisconsin they're still kind of in trouble. Things are a little bit all over the place up there. Some bodies of water, people are still only walking if they're willing to battle the slush. I haven't heard really any reports of any trucks or anything on the ice, but you pretty much need a snowmobile to go anywhere up there. Four-wheelers aren't going to get around.
You talk about a little bit when you said it depends on the area, right? And one of the first things that I'm curious about when I think of Wisconsin, I think of, geographically, you've got Lake Superior on the north, Lake Michigan on the east, and then you have just a whole diversity of different regions within the state. Talk a little bit about that. Just share with us a little bit about what some of those regions are and maybe what their personality is for the ice anglers.
Yeah. So the area I live in, I refer to it simply as like West Central Wisconsin. So that's basically the Eau Claire area, straight west towards Hudson, north towards, I would say, kind of that Barron Rice Lake area, and then south down towards Pepin, Durand. So in that area of the state is primarily panfish fishing. There's a lot of pretty solid crappie lakes, pretty solid bluegill lakes around here, and then you get down towards the Mississippi River. So obviously a lot of perch and things like that. That's kind of that west central Wisconsin area. A lot more small basin type lakes, like you're talking 200-acre lakes, and some a little bit larger, some a little bit smaller. As you go north, towards that Hayward area, you kind of see more of kind of the deeper, clear, bigger bodies of water, like your grindstones, your lac your round lakes. And those obviously are conducive to panfish, but they're also more conducive to things like smallmouth and walleyes as well. You go kind of west of that Hayward area, you get into Spooner, Danbury, Webb Lake, and then you get a lot more small kind of panfish lakes again. Northeastern part of Wisconsin, you have Vilas and Oneida County, which are just chock full of water. That's kind of like our Ottertail County over here. Just lakes upon lakes, and anything you want to catch lives up there. I'm not super familiar with kind of that southeastern part of the state, but around that Madison area, there's only a handful of lakes that get fished primarily.
Okay, Blake, I'm just going to ask you, and maybe it's a little bit off on a tangent here, but before we were getting ready to record this episode of Shack Talk, sitting here kind of waiting, and I flip on Instagram, and I see a picture of like a fan boat, an airboat on the ice. Was that recently? Was that just something that you got to experience as of late? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so just last week, I'd never been on an airboat in my life, but I just happened to have 2 back-to-back days, completely different groups of people. One was an airboat trip down, kind of further down in the Mississippi towards like Ferryville, Wisconsin. Took an airboat trip with a bunch of the St. Croix crew. And then the following day, I had another trip booked with just a group of friends here from the Eau Claire area. And that was a little bit closer to Eau Claire. So ice conditions were totally different there than they were anywhere else I've been this year. It's a very interesting experience to be driving on ice, have the ice break through, you're in open water, and then you're back on ice again. So very, very different than anything around here.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. It's something I've never done, Kyle.
Nope, not for me.
It's worth the trip.
Yeah, we'll have to maybe add that to the list.
Absolutely.
Even if the fishing's terrible, the experience is very, very unique. It's unlike anything I've ever done before.
Yeah, I can imagine. And targeting, what were you mainly targeting?
Yellow perch. So that's
Sure.
primarily Mississippi River in the wintertime. That's kind of one of the bigger targets. And I was on the Mississippi River both days.
And
Fun.
successful?
One day, okay. The other day was fantastic. So
that's fishing, right?
Yep, it's how it goes. You can't control the fish.
I always say if you get 3 days on the ice and you get one of those days that's really good, right? It's a successful trip.
That's 100%.
Cool. So, Blake, I also see that you do a lot of fishing for trout. So
I do, in this neck of the woods. Yep.
I want to know a little bit about that. I've done it just a couple of times, around here in Minnesota, North Dakota, this area, but really eager to learn what it's like there where you're at.
Yeah. So obviously all the trout lakes over here are completely stocked. So everything that's in there, these fisheries are designed to be put and take primarily. Large majority of them, there's no natural reproduction that occurs. You might have some trout that hold over in these lakes, but the large majority of it is just a kind of a put and take fishery. Obviously, you can catch and release if you want to, but in these situations, like I'm a big believer in catch and release, and I still will with larger trout in these fisheries. But these fisheries are designed, like I said, put and take. So it's a good opportunity if you just want to keep some fish. You want something that's a little bit different than a crappie, a bluegill, or a walleye. The trout fisheries are kind of the way to go.
Is there a special season for that in Wisconsin?
No. So we do have our stream trout season, which is different from our stocked trout season. So our stocked trout season just follows the game fish season here. So you can basically fish for them whenever game fish is open for things like walleyes, bass, and pike. But then the stream trout season, that kicks off usually around the first weekend in January. There's a catch and release season that runs until fishing opener, and then the stream trout, you can keep them after that point.
Any certain tactics or techniques for targeting those stock trout? I mean, I know in the podcast we've talked a lot about fishing bluegills and crappies, and I mean, I think our listeners have a pretty good standing of that. But maybe some of the different techniques for targeting trout. Anything that you would give some advice to the listeners?
Yeah, so I'm also a big panfish guy. So kind of what I found, at least in the lakes by me, is that trout and panfish kind of do the opposite thing. So if panfish are in shallow, like they are typically in the warmer months, the trout are going to be out deep, and then vice versa. So in the wintertime, the large majority of my focus on trout is under 10 feet of water. They do go out to the deeper basins during the day. They'll roam around, but they're always coming back in shallow. Like typically, I try to set up some sort of structure or cover nearby, whether it's a tree in the water or a weed line or rocks or something that they'll typically come in, look for food, and just keep going. And trout are constantly on the move. I mean, obviously fish are in general, but watching a trout on camera versus say a crappie or a bass or a walleye will typically come in slow, where a trout, they just come flying through and then they come flying through. So it's a totally different kind of deal than pan fishing or walleye fishing.
Live bait, artificials, what's your preferred tactic there?
So I have found a lot of success with kind of a combination, I should say. So I like little lipless crankbaits, and then either I'll tip them with a plastic or a wax worm, and both seems to work well. But lipless crankbaits, like a Eurotackle Z Viber is my favorite. That's caught probably 90% of the trout in the lakes by me.
That's fun. Have you, and talking a little bit more and expanding on some of the trout bites, have you ever had the opportunity to expand to some of the harbors or the tributaries over on the east side of the state?
I haven't personally. It's on my list, but I have not been able to make it over there yet.
Same
that looks
here,
like
on the list.
Yeah, totally different game than what I'm doing.
Okay, so you talked about put and take, right? So they're stocked and they're there to catch, and then you keep them, right?
Yep.
Or is it you keep them when you catch them there because they're stocked for that purpose? What's your favorite way to prepare them? You bring them home, you have them for the table. What do you do with them?
So my personal favorite way is on the grill. A lot of people will just simply cut the head off, gut them. I'm not a fan of having to pick bones out of my meat. Like I don't like doing that. My wife is not going to eat it if she has to pick out bones. So I just fillet it like I would fillet anything else. Put it down. Leave it on the skin. Put it on tin foil on the grill with just some little bit of seasoning, a little bit of olive oil, and it's fantastic.
Nice.
No, that
sounds
delicious.
Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we talked a little bit about the eastern side of the state there too. They've got the trophy caliber trout over there.
Right. Yep. I mean, we have, trophy is a relative term. So we have trophy trout for our neck of the woods. A trout in kind of that 20-inch class would definitely be a trophy trout for west central Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, until you get towards Lake Superior or Lake Michigan, and then nobody cares about a fish that size. So
here's a question for you when it comes to Wisconsin ice fishing. This is just an observation from my perspective, and I'm really curious on your thought in terms of how Wisconsin anglers, view time on the ice. Last episode we talked to Richard Yvonne, and I don't know if you caught that episode or not, Blake, but he was just what a great perspective on a different part of the world, a different part of the country, and how ice fishing is viewed out there. But he kept talking about fish traps. Right, fish traps, fish traps, and it took me a little bit, but I finally caught on. He's talking about tip ups, right, and that's what I know them as, tip ups. So I have observed that the times I've fished in Wisconsin with my friends out there, or whether it be something in the ice fishing industry, lots of tip up fishing, a lot more tip up fishing. In fact, I remember one trip going, and the people knew we were from Minnesota, and they had a separate spot for us to go to jig fish with a rod and reel. They were all going to set up in an area just to set tip ups up, and then they were roaming back and forth and a lot more social and whatnot. Tell me just a little bit about that philosophy. Is that common throughout the state?
Yes, it's very common. So I actually grew up in northern Minnesota. So when I moved to Wisconsin, it was like this culture shock because I'm used to drilling a lot of holes, running around, jigging for fish, and then I get over here and you meet people like, oh yeah, I really like ice fishing, and then you go out with them and all they do is set tip ups, and you're like, well, this isn't ice fishing, this is just setting tip ups. So it's a very different thing. I don't know if partially it has to do with that we're allowed 3 lines over here, but it is a very different ice fishing culture. You'll meet people who like to run around and jig for fish and do that kind of thing, but there is this big kind of culture around tip ups in Wisconsin. Um, Lots of
It
people I know that's all they do.
To me, it's something I'm learning more and more of, just because I, being from Minnesota, like I was, and Anthony, you're just not exposed to it to the level that you are, and it's also prevalent here in the Dakotas as well. But thinking about winter fishing, and the fish and their metabolism is so slow, having a set line like that where it's stationary live bait, I mean, truly it makes a lot of sense. It's really an
Yeah,
effective way to present your bait in front of a fish. Not to mention the whole social aspect.
100%. And like there is a good reason to have a tip up set up a lot of times or some sort of dead stick, but to me it just takes part of the fun out of it. I'm a very active angler, I guess. I like to run around, try to find fish that way. So it's just a very different approach than someone like myself is used to.
Yeah, it definitely changes your mindset for the day when you know you're gonna go set up tip ups and maybe set up a grill and have a relaxing day on the ice. Whereas
Yes.
running and gunning, it definitely is a different mindset, and you have to be prepared for that. I know I've got a few buddies that like to either sit in the shack with the rattle reels down or tip ups, and it's definitely a different mindset when you're going out and you're gonna spend the day attacking the ice.
Right.
I,
Totally different.
I'll tell you what, talk about being prepared, Anthony. What I did to be prepared the next time I fished down Wisconsin waters is I made sure that I brought along some tip ups, but I also made sure my wife swapped the flags out. Instead of just the red flag or orange flag, I had a purple and gold Minnesota Vikings flag. And that really gained the attention of some of those folks over there in the state of Wisconsin.
I'm sure it did.
We're not trying to scare away any listeners, Kyle.
Yeah, right.
Might be a little too
It
soon.
might be
Definitely
a
too
little
soon.
too
Yeah,
soon. Yeah.
Wisconsin was shut down today. So
Blake, I know that you're pretty involved in the outdoor industry. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that are part of your world and what you do.
yeah, so I work with a lot of different brands. A lot of the stuff that I get involved with kind of revolve around the marketing side of things. So do a lot of writing, do a lot of photography for different brands. I also run social media accounts for a few different companies as well. And then the last few years been running the pro staff for a couple of companies as well.
Excellent. That's getting involved to a different level than a lot
Yes.
of us are involved in. And congratulations, you were also awarded a photography award. You mentioned photography, but the Association of Great Lakes Outdoor Writers recognized your work here this past year, and you took home a trophy there. So great
Yeah.
job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's always fun to see ice fishing recognized in some of those greater outdoor organizations, right? I think a lot of times hunting and open water fishing take much of the spotlight, but you see that ice fishing in there too. It's really rewarding.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yep. A lot of those organizations are definitely very focused on hunting and open water fishing. So it's nice to throw a little mix in there, make sure they get a taste of what we deal with up here.
Absolutely.
I know before the podcast we were talking a little bit about coming over and visiting Minnesota, and we were talking about different lakes and surveys and things. How about Wisconsin? Do they have pretty good resources for trying to find information on lakes and areas to target?
Um, it's different information. So there is information available, but not to the level that it's available in Minnesota. So Minnesota DNR, you can find information readily available as to all the fish species that are found in a lake. You can find the sizes that were found in the latest survey. Wisconsin doesn't have that. If you want that information, typically you can get it from somebody who works for the DNR, but it's not readily accessible. Instead, what the DNR does over here is they classify a lake, the species abundance into it's either abundant, common, present, or non-existent. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. You could go to a lake that is abundant for crappies, but that could just mean that there's thousands of 6-inch crappies in there, and you won't know until you get there. So it's a little bit different, but like I said, you can get some of that information from a local DNR person if you need it.
Well, still the information as to whether they're abundant or not present or somewhere in between. I mean, regardless of size structure, that's still really helpful information.
Yes, it definitely helps. It helps you decide whether or not a lake, if you're targeting walleyes, if there's not even walleyes present in the lake, well, you're not going to fish that lake. So it is helpful information. What the advantage I would say that we have over here is our stocking database. It's a very, very extensive stocking database that the DNR puts a lot of effort into. Very easy to find which lakes have which species stocked, when they were stocked. It goes back to the 70s. So that is a really helpful tool that we have here that I know there is that stuff available in Minnesota, but the resource over here seems to be a little bit more improved, I would say.
No, absolutely. I think that's a good tool for people to use. Any other advice for somebody that's, maybe either looking to get to Wisconsin, trying a new lake, lives in Wisconsin, wants to branch out a little bit? What else advice would you give somebody that's maybe heading to a different part of the state that they're maybe not familiar with?
There's a lot of great tools online. I mean, obviously, you hate to say, look at the old reports, but sometimes you can find some great information on those old reports. I know if I'm going to an area I've never been before, I go look back as far as I can get back on Lake Link and whatever other sites just to see, maybe they were catching this, and this, and 10 feet of water. That's super helpful information. Reach out to a local bait shop. A lot of times they're more than willing to spill secrets because they want people to come to the area, stop in at their bait shop. Outdoor News has a great tool. They have the weekly fishing reports. So if I'm going to a new area, I'm always checking that thing out as well. Reach out to people online. I don't hesitate to do that if I know them. Maybe just throw a list of lakes past them and see, hey, are these worth trying or not?
No, I think that's great advice. I know in both Minnesota and North Dakota, I'm assuming Wisconsin has something similar, an ice fishing page on social media that, guys will kind of throw some advice out there. And, sometimes you only get what you put into it, but sometimes there's some bits and pieces you can pick through and get some information out of it as well.
Absolutely.
Then there's the good old fashioned way, like the old guys like me have to rely on, which is when you're out and about, and really truly any time of the year, right? You're out and about and it's maybe an area that you haven't fished or aren't familiar with, just to swing into that local bait shop. And even if it's July, to ask about what things are like in that area during the winter and ice conditions, accessibility, fishing, I mean, you name it. There's just so much information you can gather from those locals, whether it is online or in person.
The biggest thing is jot it down. I can't tell you how many things I've learned from somebody that I've forgotten because I didn't put it in my phone or write it down somewhere. Like, I swear there was a good lake around here, but I don't remember which one it is,
Yep.
As we kind of rounded the corner after the first of the year, I know a lot of areas start to have some ice fishing competitions or gatherings or different things. What type of events go on in Wisconsin? Anything that would be interest of people trying to come and visit and maybe experience something new?
Yeah, there's a lot of smaller local ice derbies, especially in the Eau Claire area. Lake Wissota is kind of the biggest lake in our neck of the woods. It's 6,600 acres, and there's usually a handful of ice fishing derbies that happen out there every year, as well as Altoona, which is one of the bigger lakes in the Eau Claire area. Check Facebook pages is probably the best place. It seems like most of these people are advertising these online. Otherwise, there is a list of tournaments and derbies on the DNR website as well, because they have to get a permit. So you can find out a lot of information that way.
I would also add too, if you're a student listening to this, if you're a ice fishing enthusiast who has, you know, kids or grandkids or whatnot, Wisconsin has a really extensive and very very widespread high school ice fishing network and league, and there's a lot of opportunities there for young folks. I think that's something that maybe some of us in the other states we can learn a little bit from. More of our efforts are focused in open water, and I've done a little bit of looking there, and they do a really nice job of getting the students out on the ice.
That's good. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I have a young daughter, and I'm hoping that she avoids the other sports and gravitates towards the fishing and hunting side, but it's a little selfish, I guess.
Or do it all. I mean, I know a
Yeah,
lot of the student anglers in our area. They play the other sports. They're in music. They're in drama, and they do the fishing too. Which I
yeah,
mean, you know what? To do it
yeah,
all while you can
e-
when you're young like that.
exactly.
Try it all.
Yeah.
See what you like.
And especially if it's through the school. I mean, they've, like you said, they've got great programs. You get to experience, different bodies of water. Usually get some gear or some promo stuff. I know the brands like to, sponsor and um, put those products in the kids' hands and get them exposure to them. And so, I mean, it'd be fun. I know selfishly, I wish that was going on when I was in high school. I would have signed up
Yep.
for that in a
Same.
heartbeat. But, if there's anybody listening or anybody that's got kids that's listening, make sure to, like Kyle said, check that out. A lot of great programs in Wisconsin for ice fishing, which would be really cool.
It's super. It's awesome. Blake, I don't, if you followed along with Shack Talk this season, Anthony and I have kind of done a little ice advice. We like to tap into your experience and expertise and do a little roundtable with that. I know up till now in all of our episodes, I've kind of led out with the first question. Let's flip flop it, Anthony. Let's get you can lead out the first one, and I'll follow it up.
All right. This actually it kind of ties in with our conversation that we had a little bit around dead sticks and tip ups. We had a question that came in and it said, how and where do you set up tip ups or dead sticks when you're out fishing? And I know it's kind of a broad question, and most of the time people are fishing for walleyes or pike with tip ups. But any advice that you would give to our listeners on where to set up tip ups or dead sticks? I know tip downs and some of that other stuff are pretty popular now. Any advice for our listeners?
Yeah, for me, anytime it makes sense, I set up a dead stick. So if I'm going to sit and fish in a specific area, I'm definitely going to, in Wisconsin, we're allowed 3 lines. So I'm going to have the one that I'm jigging with, and then I'm going to set out 2 dead sticks. If I'm going to be more mobile, that's, it's less likely that I'm going to take the time to set one up, just because I don't want to have to pack everything up every time I want to hop quickly to a new spot. For me here, I rely on dead sticks a lot for both trout and for crappies. I do not do a lot of walleye fishing here in Wisconsin. Primarily what I'm doing is setting those up in just a little bit different area than the area that I'm trying to cover as I'm walking around and jigging. I look for some sort of cover or structure edge, like particularly with trout in particular. I like to set that up maybe right along a weed line. Gives them the fish kind of a good ambush point as they're following that weed line. See that minnow hanging there. Seems to work well that way.
Kyle, how about you? What are your tactics for running tip ups or dead sticks?
As I said earlier, it's kind of an area of angling that I'm still learning about, and that makes it fun. Learned a lot last spring fishing that day with you, Anthony, you and Mike up on Lake of the Woods. They're targeting big pike, and just the idea of spreading your lines and your presentations out over a large area. I've also done it on a little different perspective, a little different approach, like fishing up on Lake Winnipeg, for instance, or any of the other fisheries, that you might target some of the game fish. Having a dead stick and then an active, like an attractor lure. You mentioned, Blake, the lipless cranks, right? And Lake Winnipeg is famous for that, for walleyes, and ripping on the lipless crank, live target, rip and wrap, whatever it might be. And sometimes those fish will come into that, but they won't actually commit to biting it. But if you have a dead stick sitting right next to it, they might just slide off and eat that dead stick.
No, I think that's great advice. I know myself too. I know kind of similar to what Blake had mentioned, setting up on structure. If I'm sitting somewhere, a lot of times I'll like to set tip ups or dead sticks and cover some depth, maybe throw one behind me that's deeper, one up shallower, and if you start getting hits one versus the other, you kind of know, hey, maybe I need to move in shallower or move out deeper, and, use it kind of more as an indicator to where maybe the fish are traveling, and don't pigeonhole yourself into one certain depth. Give yourself some flexibility to move around. I've had some good luck with that, especially mornings and evenings. Those fish tend to slide out from shallow to deep and kind of backwards in the evenings from deeper to shallow. And sometimes you'll get lucky and capitalize on a few extra bites having those dead sticks or tip ups out.
Great information. Great information. Okay, Blake, here's the one we've had as a consistent theme throughout the season. Okay. And the question is, which in your mind, in your experience, is more difficult to catch? 30-inch walleye, 40-inch pike, 50-inch muskie. Doesn't necessarily have to be through the ice, although we could limit it to that. But we're kind of open to, at least to start with, to see which you think is more difficult. Or a 15-inch crappie, 15-inch perch, or an 11-inch bluegill.
I've listened to every one so far, and this is one of the hardest questions to answer because it's really dependent on the area you live in, more than anything. I mean, if you live on Lake of the Woods, your chances of catching a 30-inch walleye are a lot better than catching an 11-inch bluegill.
Right.
In the area that I live in this part of Wisconsin, I would say an 11-inch bluegill is an almost impossibility. So I'm going to go with an 11-inch bluegill, specifically for my neck of the woods. Man, that's really tough. 50-inch muskie, those happen around here. There's a lot of muskie water in Wisconsin. I know a lot of people that have caught a 50-inch muskie. I know a handful of guys that have caught 40-inch pike. You can go down to the Mississippi River and catch 15-inch perch. But 15-inch crappies, those are tough to catch. But I would say an 11-inch bluegill is even harder to catch.
What about your personal experience? How many of those have you checked off your list?
Walleye, crappie, gotten close on a bluegill, close on a pike, close on a muskie. So I got 2 out of those, I guess. I've had more 15-inch crappies
tough.
than I have.
I mean, I think it's, and I know we get it a lot of times from the listeners and just as the group of guys that we hang out with too, it's, that's definitely kind of that line, right? Like you're trying to always attain and, working towards. And like you said, it really depends on where you go and where you fish. And, some people fish the waters where those fish are more prevalent and others, have to work a little bit harder to get on some of those species.
Right. Yep. It's it's so geographical driven. I think more than anything, you can't catch a 15-inch crappie if a 15-inch crappie doesn't exist in the lake you fish. It's as simple as it is. You have to have those fish there to catch them. So if you don't, you're probably not going to.
I find it interesting to listen to some of the folks in, you run across either out on the ice or wherever it might be that you have that conversation. But some people are truly driven by those marks, right? Or their personal bests and wanting to always improve. And still yet others you'll hear, they just want to get away. They want to get away from the grind. They want to get away from work. They want to get it just away and relax on the ice or have a laugh with their buddies. And they could care less about, catching a trophy fish. They just want to get out and have some fun. And I always think that's the two sides of it, right? The hardcore, we want to get the trophy, but we want to enjoy our time out there and have some fun. And then for me, it's always trying to balance, doing all of it, right? Doing both of those things.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough part, and a lot of times for me, it's kind of who am I fishing with? If I'm going to fish with my family or some of my friends, this is going to be a relaxing day. We're just staying in this area. This is all we're doing. But if I'm out by myself with some other friends, like we're going to find the biggest fish we can find.
You mentioned that you have a daughter.
Yes.
How old is your daughter? Does she come out on the ice with you? Tell us just a little bit about your family, if you don't mind.
Yeah, she's almost 2. Had her out on the ice once last year, and then I'm sure we'll get her out a handful of times this year. So
No, that's
yeah,
exciting.
yeah, had her in the boat quite a few times over the summer. So I think she'll hopefully she likes the ice more than she did last year. I mean, she was only 1 last year, so it was a little bit tough for her to kind of walk around and do anything. But I think this year hopefully is a different story. She loves seeing fish when I bring them home. Loves digging in the middle bucket. So she definitely likes fish.
It's fun to watch. Kids are really fun like that, those young age, right? The baby, the 1 year old up to, but where you're at right now is where, in my mind, where it gets fun as an outdoor parent, or for me, a grandparent, right? Because
Yes.
now it's not just that they're our little kid or our little grandkid. It's like, oh, all of a sudden they start loving to dig in the minnow bucket, or they
Yep,
understand what it means to catch a fish. So yeah, you're in for some great times.
for sure.
Well, Blake, I don't know. I think we covered most of what we wanted to talk about. Really appreciate you having on. If anybody has any questions for your area, Wisconsin, what's a good way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, social media is a great way. Otherwise, email to blake.tollefson@gmail. That or probably Instagram are the 2 best places to get a hold of me. If anybody has any questions or coming over to this neck of the woods, um, pretty much anywhere in northern Wisconsin, I'll try and point you in the right direction.
No, that's great. And I know we'll be in contact. I know you're kind of heading our direction soon. So if we don't,
Absolutely.
hopefully we'll maybe be able to cross some paths, or at least point you in the right direction and give you some advice. And for any of our listeners too, feel free to reach out to any of our guests, Kyle or myself. Always happy to point someone in the right direction. I know as an ice fishing community, sometimes it's hard to get that information. A lot of guys like to hold it pretty tight to the vest, but I think helping people out, pointing them in the right direction. I might not give you my waypoints, but I'll tell you if you're on the right track and give you some of that information. So feel free to reach out to us. Thanks again to Eskimo for allowing us to have the Shack Talk podcast and bring in these great guests every week. And from Kyle, myself, and Blake, everybody that's listening, get out, enjoy some ice fishing, and be safe on the water. We'll talk to you next time.